ongoing series of videos that we are streaming live in our Facebook group every evening during the pandemic of 2020. During the great lockdown of 2020, we are streaming these live videos in our Facebook group and building them up into units. And I'm going through the Waite-Smith Tarot, Kabbalah, the Thoth Tarot, divination and other practices as we go along, and taking questions from the live group as well. At the moment, I think we've done about 38 of these, 33. I don't know. I don't even know what year it is anymore. So I'm sure we've done into our mid-30s of these, and there's about 20 hours of material so far. Now, I'm trying to pack in a lot of content rather than we don't need to pad this out like a YouTube video. I've watched tarot YouTube videos, and I wondered why they kept repeating things time and time again and saying, you guys have asked me so many questions about such and such, and I'll get onto that in a minute, but I just wanted to share. And it goes on like that. And then there's like 1 minute of actual information that you could get just about anywhere else, surrounded by 20 minutes either side of filler, basically. And it's because in a YouTube video, you're not selling information, you're selling the advertising space that, you know, turns up down at the bottom of the screen here. So the longer you have people watching, the better it is for you. And so the whole thrust of a YouTube video tends to be on extending the data, keeping you interested and entertained and everything else. But here we don't have to do that. We can just give you some information and share some information and discuss it and have questions and so on. So we're already 2 minutes in, so I've wasted a load of time just padding it out. What we're going to do today is we are going to look at just 2 cards, and if you're interested in practical tarot reading, today is not your day. We are not going to do anything practical today. It's more conceptual, and it's particularly based on these 2 cards, the High Priestess and the World. This session, I guess, is for anyone interested in Arthur Edward Waite's work, anyone interested in the initiatory system, anyone interested in the occult and esoteric version of tarot. And I'm going to be specifically looking, and I've made some notes for today as well, on a concept called the Shekinah. And I'm going to be sharing some of the background and information that Tali and I published as Abiding in the Sanctuary, the Waite Trinic Tarot, Christian Mystical Tarot, 1917 to 1923. Because until we published this, very few people knew that Arthur Edward Waite had gone back to tarot 10 years after this deck. He saw this deck in his autobiography called Shadows of Life and Thought. He referred to this tarot as a delightful experiment. And so he only saw this as a sort of experimental version of what he called a rectified tarot. So over the last couple of sessions, if you are interested in the minor arcana, go back over the last 2 sessions from this one, where we discussed Pamela Coleman Smith's take on the minor arcana and her theatrical designs and the influences on those cards. But we know that Waite had a far more precise meaning for the major arcana, and probably, as he said, spoon-fed Pamela a lot more about that. Now, I just wanted to read you, to begin with, something that Waite said about the major arcana, and particularly the idea of the Shekinah, which we're going to talk about at length during this session. Because if we think the theatrical components of the minor arcana give us ways of reading those cards, then when it comes to the majors, we need to understand the Shekinah. So you need to understand Shakespeare to read the minor arcana, and the Shekinah to read the major arcana if you want to do it straight from Waite and Smith. Okay, so this is what Waite said in a lesser known article called The Tarot and the Rosy Cross. And he said, if the tree of the Sephiroth were delineated according to the true spirit of the Rosy Cross, it would appear as the rose tree of the Shekinah, she being the rose of all the worlds. Okay, now to end this session, I'm not going to read a short story from Invisible Cities as I have been doing. We're going to read a poem by Arthur Edward Waite. That's what I'd like to read as a bedtime poem for this particular session, because Waite was a very poetic soul. He was a very deep and profound mystic. He had quite a riotous personal life that belayed the sort of straight-jacketed, waistcoat-wearing, stuffy fuddy-duddy that a lot of people assume that Waite was by the pictures of him, and more particularly Aleister Crowley's tarring of him. Aleister Crowley nowadays would be Waite's troll, basically. Aleister Crowley spent most of his life trolling Waite. And there's one very interesting fact that that didn't come up until Tony and I were doing a lot of research on it, but Waite never mentions Crowley, not once. Not once. Not once does Waite ever write about Crowley. Not once. Crowley published an obituary of Waite, which he called Dead Waite, and he published it before Waite had even died. That's how much Crowley wanted to troll Waite. He painted this picture of Waite as a using a lot of language, claiming a lot of grades. When he reviewed the Waite-Smith tarot, he praised Pamela's work, sort of, in as much as Crowley ever would do. But he really went in for Waite and basically said that that chambermaids should check their pockets to make sure Waite hadn't stolen money from them on his way out the back door. So Waite really respected his oath and his spirituality, and just didn't give Crowley any magical connection, any time, any attention, any energy at all. And that sort of shows the difference between the two men, because Lord knows there was enough opportunity for Waite to want to defend himself against Crowley's constant attacks. Now, in my opinion, my personal opinion, having studied both their life and works and original materials for the best part of 3 decades, my feeling is that Crowley was insanely jealous of Waite's natural mysticism. It's what first drew him to the Golden Dawn was through Waite's translation of Eckenstein's Cloud in the Sanctuary, talking about secret order. And Waite, in the introduction to that, had said, I'm part of a secret order, as Eckenstein talks about in the Cloud on the Sanctuary. And that's really what attracted Crowley in the first place to the Golden Dawn. And then they probably met. They might have met very briefly, but their personalities were so different that they would have just not had anything to do with each other thereafter. But I think then Crowley had to work hard. Crowley worked hard as a magician. He really was not an armchair magician. You can't call someone an armchair magician when they're trying to do the Abramelin on the back of a donkey riding across China. That is not a definition of a armchair magician by a long way. So Crowley had to work hard at his magical and mystical attainment. Waite had it in spades just naturally, and that comes through Waite's writing, which is verbose but not imprecise, I have to say. So we get this idea of Waite having this deep mysticism, but he didn't really put it into this deck. He sort of hints at it, which is why Pictorial Key is so annoying to read. You get hints of it, but you don't get the real thing. You know that Waite is sort of saying, oh, I do know something, but I can't tell you. And some things seem to make sense, but they don't have any context. But that's because Waite was trying to keep his oath. When he later came 10 years later, with his own organization, the FRC, the Brothers of the Rose Cross, the Fellowship of the Rose Cross, he designed a new tarot deck for it. And those pictures are in this book, Abiding in the Sanctuary. And this is the Empress. This is a close-up of the Empress. And it was only the major arcana, because Waite was not interested in the minor arcana, and that's why we partly know he had very little to do with the minor arcana in his first delightful experiment, the cartoon version of the tarot. So this was for divination, and even though Waite was not particularly into divination, he did write as the Grand Orient. He wrote several books on divination, including on dream symbolism and coffee ground, the reading of coffee grounds, and that's where we get Waite's view on the Lenormand, because Waite actually wrote on a lot of the dream symbols and coffee ground symbols that are mirrored in the Lenormand deck. So I think in learning Lenormand, we actually look at what Waite said about those Lenormand symbols. So, but this deck was created not as a deck, but as images to be used in ritual and for meditation. There's a beautiful description by Trinick, who was the stained glass artist who painted this deck for Waite, and I'm just going to see if I can find some of Trinick's stained glass work. That's not safe for work. And you can still see some of Trinick's stained glass work in the churches that we mention in the book. That's a very fascinating piece of stained glass, because it has 10 images that follow Genesis, but it's actually the 10 Sephiroth as well. And it's on it's hidden in a church. There's a lot of Dan Brown type mysteries, real life ones in this book, including strange telephone calls from real life secret orders telling us what we could and couldn't publish. All sorts of things happened in the production of this particular book. It's something quite special and personal that sort of seeps out of the images themselves. They were hidden in the British Museum for 34 years before Tarley found them, and the whole set had been hidden for 100 years. The images you can now see on the British Museum website, because we paid to have them photographed through a sort of crowdfunding thing quite a few years ago now, but it's not all of the images and not all of the versions are on the British Museum site. The other ones are in here as well. So what we need to say about Waite is that he used the images for mystical illustration. And what he wanted to do was really show these images as a symbol of the paths of mystical ascent. And so he wanted to really elevate it to its highest level. And he utilized the images within ritual, so that the ritual would be presented to a candidate in the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, and at a particular stage, curtains would be drawn and the image would be presented to you just at the right moment to catalyze all of the ritual activity that was going on. And then thereafter, whenever you looked at that image, it would constantly unveil its secrets to you through the symbolism. And we see the same thing in the Thoth Tarot to some extent, although that reveals Crowley's Thelema, as we briefly touched on in some of our previous sessions, but you don't see it as much in this deck. There are hints of it, but this is like the outer deck, whereas this is more like the inner deck for this one. Now, I wanted to, there are three books that I'd mention, and I made a note of them here by Waite. The Way of Divine Union, Steps to the Crown, and Studies in Mysticism. Each of these, and particularly The Way of Divine Union, if you can get into it, is probably the most succinct version of Waite's mysticism. Waite's mysticism has been called a philosophical pantheism. Basically, he saw the divine in all things, and he saw it from a peculiarly Catholic sort of way in its true meaning. He didn't believe in the church, but he believed in a secret tradition that carried all of these secrets. And hello to Michael, who's just joined us. So in Abiding in the Sanctuary, we both give the cards, but also I hint, and I have to hint, at some of Waite's unpublished writings, because in the British Museum, in the book called The Great Symbols of the Paths, from which all of these images are taken, well, not all of them, some of them are from a set that I acquired off eBay, would you believe, strangely enough, in a bizarre coincidence that started off all of this. There's some unpublished and unfortunately unpublishable typescript with Waite's writing in. You can get hold of similar things in a couple of books that have been published called The Rituals of the FRC, but they're different versions and different takes at different times of Waite's evolution as a writer of ritual. So the most important thing that I would have to say about all of this, though, is about the Shekinah. Now, I just wanted to introduce this today for something to think about, and then tomorrow we're going to get back on some more sort of practical tarot reading. But I couldn't leave the Waite-Smith tarot without mentioning this from the major arcana and Waite's perspective. So the Shekinah is the it means like the indwelling. I think I wrote down what it actually means. Dwelling place or setting. And the Shekinah literally means a place where something dwells. And it was seen as the presence of the divine in biblical writing and in Kabbalistic writing thereafter as being the sort of presence of God originally over the tabernacle in the temple, but it could also hover over other things, particularly sacred things, or if you had 10 people together for the Sephiroth, practicing something sacred, then the Shekinah could come and sort of hover and indwell within that meeting or within someone's thoughts or in a sacred place. So the Shekinah is seen as a presence of the divine manifesting in this world. Now, Waite saw this very, very specifically as a real thing. He obviously had experience of this dwelling nature of the divine that he could see into the world as it appears. And that is why the Shekinah is often, it corresponds to Malkuth down at the bottom of the tree of life. And it's sort of seen as the bride of God, as Kether. So whilst you may have these ideas about Kether and Malkuth or God, then think more Kabbalistically that the divine has an infinite number of faces, and we can see it as a feminine down here and a masculine up here, and that the Shekinah needs to be risen up to Bina, to understanding, where it literally stands under and reflects Kether into the rest of the universe. So there are two forms of the Shekinah, and we'll come back to this. It's a very important point. There is the sort of bride of God, and also the reflective nature of the divine into the rest of the universe. It sounds very Christian, obviously, it sounds very religious, but it is what it is. And Waite saw it as part of the journey of the Spirit on the tree, that we had to open ourselves to that presence. And interestingly enough, in the book of the Secret Word and the Highway to Fortune, he lists 4 different descriptions of all of the 22 major arcana. And those who've been following this series will know automatically, I hope, that that would be the 4 worlds, and it is the 4 worlds. And when he describes the world as a tarot card, he says this: it is the law and state of paradise. And if you've been following along, then you'll know that that's Pardes, the 4 worlds again. The Shekinah is grace, but not divine union. And then also elsewhere, he says that the world is the sum of all things, divine consciousness, but listen to this bit: the end of religion in a person. The end of religion in a person. He says that the world card, down at the bottom of the tree of life, here, in between Malkuth and Yesod, is the end of religion in a person. The end of religion in a person. And in that same section, he then says that the high priestess is the first form of personal illumination. The first form of personal illumination. Now, the high priestess goes on this middle path up here between Tiferet and Kether. So if I put her there, you can see how those pillars are formed on the tree of life, of course. And the world is the unity that's down at the bottom. But he says that is the end of religion, and this is the first form of personal illumination. Waite made a specific difference between the Shekinah as being a state, a desired state, that the first form comes as grace, and it blows your concept of the universe out. Whatever you believe in, all of your beliefs, that first moment of actual, real, true, authentic spiritual experience changes your attachment to your own beliefs. So you do become free of religion externally. And this is where Waite talks about the external church and the secret tradition. The secret tradition is the esoteric one, where we have a more Gnostic sense of self-connection, that we have to do it ourselves, not through a church or through a religion or through any specific ritual, but we have to release that, sacrifice everything that we do believe in the face of truth, in the face of the true, authentic, real world spiritual experience. And that is why it is down at Malkuth. In the more Thelemic system, this is also known as the place of the vision of the holy guardian angel, which seems odd Kabbalistically because that's usually Tifreth, where the psyche, the personality of a person is fastened to the divine nature through an intermediary in Tifreth. But it's actually placed at Malkuth. And it sounds a bit overcomplicated, perhaps, but that's just the nature of the map. It is a little bit complicated. What happens is at Malkuth, that is where you realize that this world, the world that you're in now, watching, listening to this and everything else, is your path working. This is Yesod. This is a model of the world that you are making in real time with no idea what's really underneath it. It really, really actually is. And that is the model of the world that you're looking at. So it may be naked, but it is dancing. And we are observing the dance through our sensory perception. And the universe is a mental state. It is a mental experience. It doesn't exist out there. It exists as a relationship between what is happening inside and what is happening outside. When they're from the outside, there's no difference, blah, blah, blah. So that state is what Waite is talking about with the world card. The High Priestess card is something totally different. That is a far more sublime, mystical, almost unspeakable real state beyond the veil, where that naked reality that we see here is now seen as the projected reality of the self. So in a mystical or experiential sense, it is when the self is now seen in awareness as directly relating to the divine, and what is between it is this universe. So both you and the divine are now arising from the relationship, and the universe is now nothing else other than awareness and the divine. And there's nothing else. There's no personality, no ego, no process, no separation, no identity, no self, no necessity, no attachment. There is just awareness and the divine, and the knowledge and conversation that goes on between those two states whilst they're separate. And it isn't until abyss that they become unified. Meanwhile, down here, when we have a sense of mortality, the body and the self, then the world is actually the same map. And the world is no different than the High Priestess in that regard. It is still arising out of a separate nature. It's a bit like in Zen, where they say, first of all, there was the mountain, then there was no mountain, and then there was the mountain again. And it's that three phases that we go through with spiritual work, through magical work, through the path of exhaustion that I teach in the Western Esoteric Initiatory system, that allows us to go through the world and eventually come to the High Priestess. Now, the Shekinah then is the embodiment of that experience. It is the dwell point of that relationship between either the self and the divine, or the divine and the awareness. There is no spoon, indeed. And that is really what Waite was all about, is what he was all about. That's why he wasn't interested in the minor arcana. For him, it was the great symbols of the path, the the way of what's called Tikkun Olam, the restoration of the world. So if you imagine that when the world is created, when you're born, the world is created, and it breaks into pieces. We separate it out. This is a card, this is another card, I am me, you are you, and everything else. This breaking of the vessels takes place from the unity that everything already exists in. It's always already the case of unity. So what we have to do is restore all of those broken sparks that have been broken off that light, and that is the mystical way, it's the spiritual way, is to redeem every broken bit of light in order to ascend upwards, or to remember one's forgetfulness of that pre-existing state. As Diane's saying, Waite-Smith were very different. Again, it's this perfect storm of two very different people just bumping together for a while and creating something unforgettable. Esther was asking about the path of exhaustion. That's just a term I use in my teaching because I think it's very important not to use all of this information or the occultism correspondences as what I call sort of wallpapering the prison wall. We've got to use them as a map to get out, to build the escape tunnel, not just to go, oh, here's some clever information, I'll put that on my wall. Here's some more clever information that matches that clever information, I'll stick that up. And eventually you end up wallpapering your prison cell. So it makes you very happy and content, and you feel very clever sat in your prison cell with all of this information surrounding you. But that's not what we want to do with it. We want to break down the belief system. This is what my teacher originally did with me for several years. Break down the belief system, the attachment, the necessities, until there's very little left. And then that spark that's left is the bit that then gets raised up into awareness, into non-attachment, into unification. Tony's asking, was Smith an occultist? She was a sort of spiritual seeker, I guess. She joined the Golden Dawn. We have in Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot a picture of her magic and her signature in the Golden Dawn book. We have a little vignette of what happened the night she was initiated into the Golden Dawn. But just after that time, she did sort of leave with Waite, I guess, for the FRC when the Order of the Golden Dawn got a bit too magical, a bit too political. And but then she, immediately after the deck, almost within a year, she converted to Roman Catholicism and became a Catholic for the rest of her life. And there's no evidence that she ever did anything esoteric or tarot related thereafter. So again, very odd that someone who wasn't into tarot, probably never did a tarot reading in her life, designed a deck, then never did a tarot reading afterwards, and that was it. And she produced one of the world's most enduring tarot decks. Women, as Esther's asking, yeah, they were allowed in the Golden Dawn. More than that, they were seen as equal. For one time, while all of the boys were squabbling politics, Florence Farr ran the Golden Dawn. She was one of their main teachers. She eventually emigrated, I think, to India, and became a teacher out in India. And yeah, she was a great teacher, apparently. I even saw a letter from her complaining that standards were slipping in the Golden Dawn because people weren't do their exams, their knowledge lecture exams, like what planet does sulfur relate to, or what correspondence to the tarot does Mars have, and so on. They were doing that without their robes. So they were just coming into the sacred hall. They were doing their exams, their mystical exams, but they weren't robed up to do it. And she was very upset about that. So I think she was my kind of teacher, really. So yes, women were definitely allowed in the Golden Dawn. Dion Fortune, Moena Mathers, Florence Farr, and quite a few other women actually came through the Golden Dawn system at various times. Okay, so in conclusion of that, because I wanted to just highlight the mystical side of the tarot as far as Waite was concerned, I just wanted to show a couple of pictures that are somewhat different in this deck. For example, the Hanged Man, you can see, is this drowned giant. There's like a sleeping or drowned god in the water with the rainbow arch for Kesheth and the ark of the tradition above it. And these are two different versions of the same image. Okay, this is the Hanged Man. In the original Golden Dawn, it was seen more to be like a drowned giant. Temperance also has two versions in the Golden Dawn and Waite's version of it. So I just wanted to show you Temperance briefly, if I can find it. Here we go. So Temperance is this beautiful image here, and this is one of the sketch versions of it. And we can see very clearly that the Sephiroth and the Tree of Life are actually labelled on it, making it very clear that this is Kabbalistic, that is based on the Tree of Life itself. Then when we take a look at the rather beautiful full version of that, I don't know if you can see that. And this is Malkuth down at the bottom, going through Yesod, and then Hesed and Gibora at the top. And this is Tali and I's Abiding in the Sanctuary, the Waite-Trinic Tarot. This is, as I mentioned in the introduction to this section, my most prized experience, I guess, for following something that felt right to follow. It was this book's revealed to us, not the other way around. Didn't go to write this book. This book wrote us. And this is the book that I have that most experience with, of just knowing that that the book had to be written, and that was it. Now, what I wanted to share with you, though, is this beautiful image of the High Priestess, because now, hopefully, it'll make sense. Now, hopefully, it will make sense. And there's three different versions of this. I think two are on the British Museum site, but this is the High Priestess from that day. The Last Judgment text refers to the next page, and this is the High Priestess here. So if you can see down at the bottom, there is a figure drawing down the moon here, and I did say that deliberately, with the High Priestess up here between the two pillars. But it looks a bit weird with me peering out the side there. So in effect, that is what we were talking about. Now you might see how that reflects the upper and the lower two experiences of the Shekinah, because Waite makes it very clear, and he even can't resist making it clear in pictorial key, that the High Priestess above all represents the Shekinah. Okay? And it's a higher experience and a lower experience that is separated by the veil. And the two other versions of that are a more simpler draft version there, and then a beautiful black and white version here as well. The plates were actually made by a member of the FRC who owned a printing press, so he was able to make plates of the images that were then used in the rituals of the FRC. Sorry, not the Golden Dawn, of course. And so these rituals still exist to this day, and these cards were hidden in the British Museum for about 34 years, but the whole set was hidden for 100 years. And Mary K. Greer, who wrote the brief introduction for us in this book, also pointed out to us, which we hadn't realised, that Waite himself said that the secret symbolism would hide for 100 years. There's a direct quote from Waite, and it was 100 years after they were first done that they were rediscovered again. So Waite was even quite prescient in that. Okay, so I'd like to finish having just say I didn't want to do anything practical today, just introduce this whole idea of what Waite truly thought the tarot was a path of the tree of life, the great symbols of the paths, and that the Shekinah was the image, the presence of the divine in human awareness as we go up the path of initiation up the tree of life. So I'd just like to finish then. Our bedtime story at 40 minutes is actually our bedtime poem, and it's a poem that we included in Abiding in the Sanctuary, and it's by A. Waite in his collected poems called The King's Secret. And I'm going to see if I can grab my glasses. Okay, I'm going to do this without glasses. Here we go. The King's Secret. Kept well, too closely kept, or so it seems. Few quests disclose the secret of the king. That presence manifest in evenings cool, long since the first garden of the world. Withdrawn today in the most secret place, of all concealment baffles researchers' search. God veils his glory from our questing eyes, we know not why, few claims are ours to press. But still the longing and the hope remain. Poor baffled reason in the end perchance finds her spent forces unto new give place. While in the soul at length, from all apart, the glory dawns, and in the depths thereof a still voice breathes the secret of the king. That's the King's Secret from Arthur Edward Waite, as quoted in Abiding in the Sanctuary. So I hope you've enjoyed that insight, I hope, into Waite's primary purpose in the tarot. There is several versions of the Golden Dawn still functioning. I teach this side of things through the Crucible Club and the Order of Everlasting Day, which is a sort of networked order that we have of people interested in the more spiritual initiatory, Western esoteric initiatory system. You can find out about that on my own website, marcuskatz.com. And I see the tarot as basically the world's biggest language for mystical development. The only reason I'm going to say this out loud for the first time, the only reason that I teach tarot is so that I have a language with other people to discuss spiritual experience, because it can't be done any other way. well, it might be done in other ways, but I find tarot and the Tree of Life, the Kabbalah, the best way to talk about spiritual and mystical experience and the initiatory process. So this is really why I think tarot is important. And it can be used for divination as well. Okay, thanks a lot for your time and attention. I hope that's sort of piqued you off in different ways. You can find the images that I've been talking about, some of them on the British Museum site. I'll see if I can put a link to that as well. Okay then, so thanks a lot for your time and attention, and we'll pick up some back to basic practical stuff tomorrow as we go through the longest lockdown in human history, with half of humanity currently on the Zoom. Okay, take care everyone. Look after you and each other. Bye for now.